Hey, what's up, guys? Today, we are going to look at some of the worst serial killers of all time, based on the number of victims. 10 worst serial killers of all time. A serial killer is a person who murders 3 or more people into a more separate event over a period of time for primarily psychological reasons. This list here shows 10 modern devils whose total proven victim counts goes up to an astounding number of 705 people. Number 10. Wang Qiang. Wang Qiang was a serial killer from the small village of Kaiyuan, Liaoning, China, and one of the most notorious murderers and artists in the Chinese history. Wang grew up in a small town in Kaiyuan, Liaoning. His father was physically and emotionally abusive towards his family, addicted to drinking and gambling, and denied Wang the chance to enter school. Due to the abuse, Wang eventually left home and lived on the streets. Wang committed his first confirmed murder on 22nd January 1995. Official records show Wang was convicted of 45 murders, 10 RS, and 34 robberies, and that most of his crimes were committed in public parks. Some young girls were RD post-mortem. During his attacks, which he was often accompanied in by other violent criminals, he would attack men suddenly and rob and female victims. Wang was sentenced to death for these murders and executed in 2005. Number 9. Alexander Pichushkin. Alexander Yuryevich Pichushkin, also known as the chessboard killer and Bitsa Park maniac, is a Russian serial killer. He is believed to have killed at least 48 people, and possibly as many as 60 in the southwest, Moscow's Bitsa Park, where a number of the victims' bodies were found. Pichushkin committed his first known murders as a student in 1992 and stepped up his crime in 2001. Russian media has speculated that Pichushkin was motivated in part by a macabre competition with another notorious Russian serial killer, Angry Chikatilo, the Rostov Ripper, who was convicted in the 1992 of killing 52 children and young women over a 12-year period. Pichushkin has said that his aim was to kill 64 people, the number of squares of a chessboard. Number 8. Gary Leon Ridgway is an American serial killer known as the Green River Killer. He was initially convicted of 48 separate murders and later confessed to nearly twice that number. As a part of his plea bargain, an additional conviction was added, bringing the total number of convictions to 49, making him the second most prolific serial killer in United States history, according to confirmed murders. He murdered numerous women and girls in the Washington state during the 1980s and 1990s. Most of his victims were alleged to be prostitutes and other women in vulnerable situations, including underage runaways. The press gave him his nickname after the first 5 victims were found in the Green River, before his identity was known. He strangled the women, usually by hand and sometimes using ligatures. After strangling them, he would then dump their bodies in the forested and overgrown areas in King County, often returning to the dead bodies to have sexual intercourse with them. Number 7. Anatoly Onoprienko. Anatoly Yuryovich. Onoprienko was a Soviet and Ukrainian serial killer and mass murderer. He was also known by the nickname the Beast of Ukraine, the Terminator, and Citizen O. After police arrested a 36-year-old forestry student on April 16, 1996, Onoprienko confessed to the killing of 52 people. The way he worked out these killings is also spine-chilling. Usually, he chose an isolated house and gained the attention of the occupants by creating a commotion. He would kill all occupants starting with the adult male, before going to find and kill the spouse and finally the children. He would then usually set the buildings alight in an attempt to cover the evidence. He would also kill any potential witness who crossed his path during his murderous rampages. Number 6. Andrei Chikatilo. Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo was a Soviet serial killer nicknamed the Butcher of Rostov, the Rostov Ripper, and the Red Ripper, who sexually assaulted, murdered, and mutilated at least 52 women and children between 1978 and 1990 in the Russian SFSR, the Ukrainian SSR, and the Uzbek Sergei Chikatilo confessed to 56 murders. He was tried for 53 murders in April 1992. He was convicted and sentenced to death for 52 of these murders in October 1992, although the Supreme Court of Russia ruled in 1993 that insufficient evidence existed to prove his guilt in 9 of those killings. Chikatilo was executed by gunshot in February 1994. Chikatilo was known as the Rostov Ripper and the Butcher of Rostov because he committed most of his murders in the Rostov Oblast of the Russian SFSR. Number 5. Yang Xinhai. Yang Xinhai, also known as Yang Jia or Yang Liu, was a Chinese serial killer who confessed to committing 67 murders and 23 arrests between 1999 and 2003. He was sentenced to death and executed for 67 murders. He was dubbed the Monster Killer by the media. He's the most prolific known serial killer China has ever seen. Yang's killings took place between 1999 and 2003 in the provinces of Anhui, Hebei, Henan, and Shandong. At night, he would enter his victims' homes and kill all of the occupants, mainly farmers, with axes, hammers, and shovels, sometimes killing entire families. Each time he wore new clothes and large shoes. In October 2002, Yang killed a father and a 6-year-old girl with a shovel and a pregnant woman, who survived the attack with serious head injuries. Number 4. Pedro Rodrigues Filho. Pedro Rodrigues Filho is a Brazilian serial killer nicknamed Petrino Matador, or Killer PT, and was arrested in 1973. In 2003, he was convicted for murdering at least 71 people and sentenced to 128 years in prison. At the age of 14, he murdered the vice mayor of Alpena, Santa Rita do Sapucaí, because he fired his father, a school guard at the time, accused of stealing the school's kitchen's food. Then he murdered another guard, supposedly the real thief. He took refuge in Mogi das Cruzes, Greater São Paulo, where he began a series of burglaries and murdered a drug dealer. There he also met Maria Aparecida Olimpia, a woman he then lived with. They lived together until she was killed by some gang members. Filho escaped. In search of revenge of her death, he murdered and tortured several people in an attempt to find out the identity of the gangster who killed Olimpia. Before he was 18 years old, he has already left a trail of 10 bodies and several injured. Still in Mogi das Cruzes, he executed his own father at a local prison after his father butchered his mother with a machete. To get revenge, Filho killed his father, cut out a piece of his heart, chewed it, and then threw it away. Number 3. Daniel Camargo. Daniel Camargo Barbosa was a Colombian serial killer. It is believed that he RD and killed up to 150 young girls in Colombia and Ecuador during the 1970s and 1980s. There, Camargo selected helpless young lower class, goes in search of work, and approached them. Pretending to be a foreigner who needed to find a Protestant pastor in a church on the outskirts of the town, he explained that he had to deliver a large sum of money, which he showed them as proof, and he offered them a reward if they would accompany him to show him the way. He pretended that he was a stranger to the area and hinted at the possibility of the girls getting a job at the factory. No one was suspicious of an older man accompanying a girl or a young woman who could be his granddaughter. Camargo would then enter into the woods, claiming to be looking for a shortcut in order to avoid arousing suspicions in his victims. If the girls grew suspicious and drew back, he did not prevent them from leaving. Camargo RD his victims before strangling them, sometimes stabbing them when they resisted. After his victims were dead, he left their bodies in the forest to be picked clean by the scavengers. Number 2. Pedro Lopez. Pedro Alonso Lopez is the Colombian serial killer who was sentenced for killing 80 girls, but claimed to have RD and killed more than 300 girls across his native country, then Peru and Ecuador, and possibly other countries. Aside from the uncited local accounts, Lopez's crimes first received international attention from an interview conducted by Ron Lettner, a longtime freelance photojournalist who reported interviewing Lopez in his embattled prison cell in 1980. According to Lettner's story, Lopez became known as the Monster of Andes Mountain in the 1980s, when he led the police to 50 graves in Ecuador. All of the girls, around 9 to 12 years old, and in 1983, he was found guilty of murder of 110 girls in Ecuador. confessing to a further 40 murders in Peru and Colombia. Lopez was released in 1998 from a psychiatric hospital on good behavior after initially being found insane. His whereabouts are currently unknown. Number 1. Luis Alfredo Garavito Cubillos, also known as La Bestia or the Beast, is a Colombian R-pist and serial killer. In 1999, he admitted to the R, torture and murder of 147 young boys. His victims, based on the location of skeletons located on a map that Garavito drew in prison, could eventually exceed 300. Garavito continues to confess 2 more murders. He has been described by the local media as the world's worst serial killer.